Well, welcome everybody to the May session of Reading Pilgrimage Together. We're delighted today to have as a special guest Dr. Louisa Trager, who asked me not to refer to as a Richardson scholar, but I have to say that frankly, anybody who's done a PhD in Richardson deserves to keep that title until we get such a population of these that we can become discriminating, I will say. So I'll start with a few, just a reminder of the administrative issues about where we are. Of course, just a second here. So this is the May session of Reading Pilgrimage Together. We're all coming together because we've on this journey through Dorothy Richardson's masterpiece Pilgrimage through the year 2022, trying to communicate and keep everybody up to speed and excited about the process over Twitter using the Pilgrimage Together hashtag. And we have material available on the Reading Pilgrimage website that's intended to help you along with the process. Sometimes reading pilgrimage can be a bit of a daunting challenge. It can be, there's more than enough material in the book that is going to cause you to ask questions, and this is just an attempt to answer at least a few of those. So here we are. We're past the biggest hurdle in the book, in the sense of the tunnel being the longest of all of the 13 volumes of the novel. From here on, the books will tend to be shorter, although I have to say Deadlock, in some ways I feel like Deadlock is actually the longest book in the whole series, because it's so rich with these long conversations between Miriam and Michael, which you'll get to discover as you get into that book. And so we're delighted today to have Louisa Treger as our guest. We're going to be talking about book 5, Interim, which is an interesting title. We might have some questions about why that title was chosen for this volume. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest, Louisa Trager. Louisa is very kindly joined. She just got through seeing one of her sons graduate from Georgetown University. So she's a proud mom of twins today, and looking forward to the other graduating in a month now from Oxford. And particularly, not only did she do a dissertation on Richardson, but she then wrote a novel taking Dorothy Richardson and the real life characters in her life as fictional characters. And so it's really kind of taking you back through this period that kind of picks up you've kind of merged a number of the volumes of the book in the Lodger. So there, if you've only read The Tunnel and you read The Lodger now, you would already see a lot of things that are familiar to you. So Dorothy is at Mrs. Baker's lodging house, which is Mrs. Bailey's lodging house. But then it kind of carries on for the next few volumes. So I would highly encourage you, if you're excited and you're interested by the book, The Lodger is absolutely worth reading. And particularly because, like any other great book, it offers you another perspective on the story, which, you know, helps you see things that you perhaps didn't catch when you were reading through the first time. And I'll just mention that Louisa has a book coming out this summer about the amazing reporter Nellie Bly, who had some, if Miriam and Dorothy had lots of rich interior adventures, Nellie absolutely had very rich and very exciting exterior adventures, so to speak. And so let me turn it over to Louisa, and just wanted to say how much we appreciate your joining us today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that very generous introduction. And thanks so much for having me. And I wanted to say I have so much, admiration for Brad and this group. I think we feel exactly the same way, that Dorothy Richardson was extraordinary. Her writing was extraordinary and should be known by more people. And that was one of my aims in writing The Lodger. And the reason I asked him not to call me a scholar is that I did my PhD in 1999 when I was pregnant with the twins that are graduating. So, while I feel very kind of alive as a novelist of her life, not so much on the scholarship side. But anyway, I discovered Dorothy Richardson by accident through having a passion for Virginia Woolf. And I was in the London University Library on a hot summer's afternoon, looking for an angle on Virginia for my PhD thesis that hadn't been covered before. And, as I'm sure you can imagine, that's a somewhat tough task because, really a lot has been said about her. It's almost impossible to find an original angle. But I did find a review by Virginia of one of Dorothy's books, and it intrigued me. And here's the sentence that caught my attention. Dorothy Richardson has invented a sentence which we might call the psychological sentence of the feminine gender. It's of a more elastic fibre than the old, capable of stretching to the extreme, of suspending the frailest particles, of enveloping the vaguest shapes. And that's from Virginia Woolf's review of Revolving Lights in The Nation and the Athenaeum from 1923. So it was the implication that Dorothy had actually reinvented the English language to record the experience of being a woman that got me. I began to delve into her life and writing, and I fell in love with Pilgrimage in all its experimental, elastic profusion. I loved her new fluid way of writing that renders the texture of consciousness as it records life's impressions, life's minute-to-minute quality, if you like. And I loved the implicit claim that an ordinary woman's life, an ordinary working woman's life, is worth paying attention to. And in fact, Brad and I were talking before this session began about how relevant her preoccupations and ideas are today. I mean, they're relevant to people of Miriam Henderson's age. For example, can I afford to pay my rent and eat at the same time? And, the fear of being followed on the way home from the tube. I mean, these things are still very relevant today. So before The Lodger, I wrote a PhD thesis about Dorothy Richardson, and my angle was an analysis of conflict in her writing. For the 4 years it took to complete, I got very close to her in my head. Then my focus was purely academic, and I had no idea at that stage that I wanted to write a novel. I finished my PhD when I was pregnant with twins with terrible morning sickness. And then there was a hiatus of several years while I focused on, raising small children. I used to use the thick volumes of my thesis to prop up their cots when they had colds and needed to be a bit more upright, to ease congestion. And I remember thinking, well, at least I'm using my PhD for something. But there was a thought simmering away in my mind all the time, and it was this: the story of Dorothy's life and the new experimental way in which she told it were absolutely fascinating, but her writing does present challenges. It's deliberately without plot, structure, or narrative, because these were narrative conventions she rejected. And to my mind, the later volumes become increasingly introspective, complex, and experimental. And actually, I'd love to hear your views on that, when you read the later volumes. But it seemed to me that these challenges are part of the reason why Dorothy's writing isn't better known. And, so I share your passion, as I said, to make her name more widely known. And I really wanted to tell her story. But I thought that in this age of short attention spans, that it was important to write it in a way that was more accessible than Pilgrimage. And hopefully, if people enjoyed the Lodger, they would actually go to Dorothy and start reading her. And so I rejected stylistic innovation in favor of traditional storytelling. And that is how the idea for the Lodger was born. So I began the first draft when my children started school and there was a bit more space in my life. My novel covers a brief dramatic period during which she has an affair with H.G. Wells, explores her independence and sexuality, rejecting the conventions and restrictions of the age, and she finds her voice as a writer. And in fact, I telescoped it a bit. Her friendship with H.G. Wells, who is Hypo Wilson in the book, actually developed over 10 years, but for me that was too slow a burn. But anyway, I chose this period because it was full of conflict, which is always meaty fodder for writers. Moreover, the conflicts were central to and representative of her character. Dorothy, and you probably already noticed these themes, as you've read, but Dorothy was torn between being bohemian and being respectable, exulting in her independence, yet being frightened by it, being attracted to men and women, wanting close relationships, and yet repudiating them. So there's this continual sort of push and pull, which never really gets resolved. And I found H.G. Wells quite compelling. And actually, my friend said to me, how can you, revolting man, look at the way he treated women. And he did treat them very badly. But I enjoyed exploring how his love affairs with some of the most attractive and intelligent women of the day actually fed his creativity, and they were indispensable to him in a way, because I think with each new woman he had this sort of rush of exhilaration, and a new book or books inevitably followed. And his wife, who was Dorothy's oldest school friend, put up with the affairs at great personal cost. She actually died of stomach cancer, and I think that was a sign of everything that she repressed over many, many years. But at the same time, he was devoted to her, and she was his sort of manager, and they couldn't do without each other. And at one point, I think Miriam says that everybody should have a wife like Jane to order her lives and their lives. And I do agree that every writer needs a Jane Wells. But I was also interested in the way Dorothy's encounters with Wells helped her find her voice as a writer. And it was partly in opposition to his views. And so some of those conversations are in my novel as they're in Pilgrimage. This stage of Dorothy's life was full of pivotal events which shaped everything that came after. And now I'm going to start sharing some images with you. I'm a techie dinosaur, so please bear with me while I try and get this right. Yeah, no, really, I really am. Hang on. I really am a dinosaur.
You can see the share screen button, right?
Yeah, no, I haven't found the right thing, and this is totally my fault.
Okay. Are you on a Windows machine?
Yes,
Well, then
yes.
you should be able to Alt Tab and see the different windows that you can select, and then select one of those. Normally, that works.
So sorry, which one do I select? And I won't spend too much time on this because I know we're being recorded. Which tab do I select, Brad?
Normally, if you if you just hit the Alt and Tab keys together, or one after the other, Alt and then Tab, you can bring up your choices of screens to share.
I'm just searching for Alt.
But if you just click on the share screen button,
Yeah.
you should see a selection of windows pop up. Do you see that? And it should say select a window or an application that you want to share. If you've got the images open now.
Yes. Yeah. No, just let me open them quickly.
Okay.
Just bear with me. I will come back to you if I lose you.
Okay. Yeah, once you have them open, you should be able to select them from the
Yeah, got
share
it now.
screen.
Okay, so sorry about that.
No worries.
And so how do I get to the next? Oh, okay, I've got it. I've got it. Okay, so here is the Lodger, and actually it was first published by Macmillan, and Bloomsbury brought out their own edition when they published my second novel, and it's available from Amazon, or I'm going to talk about you know, how to get hold of a copy to anyone who's interested at the end. And I've often been asked what made me want to write a fictional account of Dorothy's life rather than a straight biography or a novel inspired by her work. I love biographical fiction because there's an interesting framework of facts on which to hang the story, yet enough wiggle room to imagine and create. Biographical fiction gave me license to dig deeper into my characters' emotional lives, to imagine myself into their private thoughts, to invent conversations and details which drew out themes I found interesting. Now, there are several episodes in several episodes in Dorothy's life that she was coy or utterly silent about, as though they were too painful or shaming to be voiced. And I think most striking among these is her mother's suicide, which she never referred to directly in any surviving writing, not in her letters or any of the novels. In Pilgrimage, it's conveyed by ellipses or dots on the page, as if this was the only way she could convey what was literally unspeakable. And another of these instances is the turmoil that surely accompanied the realization that she was attracted to Veronica Leslie Jones, who is Amabel in the novel, because this was at a time when homosexual acts were punishable by law and by social ostracism. These omissions or repressions formed a significant part of my novel. And in fact, bringing them to life and colouring them in was one of the most interesting parts of writing it. Within the framework of the biographical events, I was able to create my own image of real people. Now, I did most of my research for my PhD in the old reading room, in the British Museum's reading room, which was the old British Library, beneath this wonderful high domed painted ceiling that historical figures like Karl Marx and Virginia Woolf worked in. And you can imagine this is a very inspiring setting. And I read everything that Dorothy wrote, and most of what was written about her. And one thing I wanted to highlight to you, and I don't know if you're aware of this or already or not, but there's a wonderful volume of her collected letters, and it's edited by Gloria Fromm, who's her biographer, and that probably brought Dorothy to life more than anything else for me. Brad, have you read them?
I can't say that I've read them cover to cover, but I mean, I
Yes.
keep it at hand
Yeah.
because it does, help illuminate many aspects
Yes.
of that.
Yes.
And I have to say this, although the book is out of print, used brand new used copies. So the essentially the remaindered copies are available all over the place, at least in the US. So it's a wonderful buy.
And I really do recommend it as a reading resource, alongside reading Pilgrimage. It's just, like every missive is packed with, her wonderful expressions and her personality, and it's wonderful. But now I want to tell you about a really thrilling moment that happened while I was researching the lodger. My husband gave me a signed first edition of John Austen and the Inseparables by Dorothy, which is a short monograph on John Austen, who is a British book illustrator, and it contains a selection of his drawings. As you can see, it's signed by Dorothy in
I'm
her
sorry,
rather...
Louisa, we're not
Yeah.
seeing the images yet. We're still
Oh
seeing you.
no, oh
Yeah.
no.
There we
Can you
go.
see? Oh, there we
Yeah.
go. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a signed book by Dorothy, and you can see her very wonderful script.
Yeah, you might find it easier for everybody to see this if you click the little a slideshow icon off in the lower right hand corner there of your screen. It looks like a little well, like a screen. Yeah, off in the
Yes.
menu bar down at the lower right hand side where you can see the zoom or the
Oh, I
the
see.
scaling. Yeah. If no, it's just above that. It's in the PowerPoint window. So you can see where it says index or notes if you go along to the right of that.
On notes.
Yeah, if you go further, just the last note, the last icon that you see on that is slideshow. If you click on that, then it'll become full screen. There
Okay,
we
is
go.
that better? I am
Yes.
so sorry about my technical ineptitude. But this is another really interesting thing that I wanted to show you, is that John Austen and the Inseparables was printed before her last 4 books came out. And she's actually taken the trouble to add Dawn's Left Hand and Clear Horizon and Dimple Hill. And I think, it's interesting that the level of insecurity this denotes. And Dorothy, when her first book came out, it created quite a stir, and gradually all that public recognition slid from her grasp, and she died in obscurity. And so clearly she felt she needed to sort of add her achievements to this very limited edition of the book. But the most magical thing that happened was when I opened the book at home and I saw, nope, I saw, sorry, Brad, how do I go back?
If you just hit the left arrow, usually that will do it for you. There you go.
No, I must have left it off.
Okay.
But what I found, I'll just have to tell you about it. So I opened the book, and what fell out was a handwritten page of notes on March moonlight. And I just thought, wow, I nearly fell over. And it was on very, very fragile, soft paper, worn by age. And it made me feel so close to her living, breathing presence. And it was almost like her hand, reaching out and touching mine. And I think it can definitely be classed as a happy coincidence. And I'm just so sorry that I don't have it for you. But anyway, the more books I write, the more it becomes clear that a pattern is emerging. I'm drawn to writing about strong women who refuse to conform and who struggle to find their place in the world, women who are groundbreakers and pioneers. And I almost wasn't aware of that happening because I find all these women but by chance, but there's definitely a reason I'm drawn to them. And as Brad said, my third novel, Madwoman, comes out in 2 weeks in the UK and end of August in the US. And it's the story of trailblazing Nellie Bly, who was America's first female investigative journalist. And to get her first newspaper scoop, she faked madness convincingly enough to get locked up in an asylum off the coast of New York. And bear in mind, this was at the end of the 19th century, at a time when women were supposed to be reticent and ladylike. And, she decided to go where no sane woman had ever voluntarily gone before, and she'd come back with a story like no other. And of course, there was no guarantee that she would ever get out. So, she was another extraordinary woman who's well worth learning about. And I wanted to say that if you're interested in reading The Lodger or Mad Woman, I'm happy to sell you copies using my author discount. So that would be £5, which I guess is about $7 in America. And if you're interested in that, please email me at the address at the top of this screen, or simply contact me through my website, which is louisatrager.com. And anyhow, I hope my talk gave you an idea of what drew me to Dorothy and why I wanted to write about her. I'm so sorry about the techie issues, but thank you so much for listening. And I'm very happy to take questions now.
Okay, can I ask if you can stop sharing?
Yeah,
there? Wonderful. Thank you.
That's one bit I could get hang of.
First of all, I have to say the whole idea of just opening that book and this note from Dorothy Richardson falling out. First of all, shame on the bookseller.
I know. Can you imagine missing something like that?
Oh my gosh, and wonderful. I mean, that means that book came from her library, right? I mean, it was probably there even when she was in her in the care home in her last days, probably.
I mean, it was probably on her desk as well when she was working, and she was probably writing notes for March Moonlight and pausing to look at what she published. It somehow got tucked in there. I do find the anecdote about her last days very poignant, and I don't know if you know this, but a visitor to the old age home where Dorothy, spent her last days, was told that she was very confused and she was having delusions. And one of Dorothy's delusions was that she was a famous writer. And the visitor turned to her and said, but she is a famous writer. And I just found that so sad and so poignant.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the things that my passion is neglected books, and obviously that means that I'm looking for these things all the time. And I mean, I read Pilgrimage, frankly, because it was out of print. Uh, and it, however, that inaccessibility of the text is such a profound obstacle. The reality is the vast majority of readers, I mean, buy books that you can buy in a bookshop or buy books that you can get brand new from Amazon or
Yeah,
their
no,
competitors.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
if you have to go, number one, if you have to go find a used copy, it's like a step function, like 5% or less of readers who buy books will buy a used copy or do that on a regular basis. And then if they're hard to find used books, it becomes, significantly even less likely that people will read this. So if you think about it, I mean, Dorothy died in 1957.
Yes.
In 1957, the last time her books had been published was 19 years before, which was a beautiful set. If you ever see any of those sets, they're wonderful books.
They're
But
amazing. I also have a first edition of The Trap, and the cover's so beautiful, and it was published by Duckworth, and the Duckworth logo is so spectacular. It's sort of in copper, and they really should print books like that still.
right. But
But
go ahead.
so one of the things I thought about was the difference between her legacy and Virginia Woolf's. And I think for a start, Woolf was immortalized because she killed herself. And also she had very powerful people protecting her legacy, like her nephew, Quentin Bell, and Leonard, who had his own publishing press. I mean, I guess Virginia was the first self-published author. And also, so there was this terrible, well, it made me always feel very sad, this sort of decline where Dorothy had to take on more and more what she called pot boilers, journalism to make money, because her husband, Alan Odell, the artist, wasn't capable of making his own living. And she also had to do all the household chores because he couldn't do those either. He was like a sort of child man, and he was an invalid. And so that was one reason, I think, why her writing got forgotten. But also it was new and amazing in its day. But then gradually more writers came who were doing the same thing, and it stopped being new anymore.
Right. Well, I think it's something that I developed kind of over the course of studying these different neglected writers is kind of a theory about degrees of connectedness and how much of a factor that is in whether or not writers' work becomes is remembered. And Dorothy Richardson and Virginia Woolf offer a wonderful contrast of essentially degrees of connectedness versus degrees of disconnectedness. So Virginia Woolf came from a literary family. I mean, Leslie Stevens, of course, one of the big figures of his generation. So she had family, and not just one, but multiple family relations with people who were in the business, so to speak. She was a reviewer and particularly became a more and more influential reviewer. So she had connectedness of people who were grateful for the good reviews
But she didn't really support Dorothy, which I find interesting. Maybe she was a bit jealous of her, like she was of Catherine Mansfield, but she didn't really do that much to promote her career. But anyway, you go on.
Well, no. Just to mention that something I posted on Twitter recently was an excerpt from Virginia's diary, where she writes that she turned down a request to review. I think it was Interim, and she essentially said, it was seriously a question of self-doubt. Like, if Richardson is doing this and I'm not, is it essentially saying that I'm not as good as I should be? Of course, this was very early in her career, where she hadn't really had breakthrough books. But I mean, so Woolf being a publisher with Leonard, the Hogarth Press. People, I mean, every author a publisher publishes ends up with a relationship with them. So, and of course, she was socialized with people. She lived in Bloomsbury in a house that was big enough and to host social events. She had a country house where she could host social activities. So you end up with, so many degrees of connectedness that it's not a surprise. On top of that, the quality of her work. I mean, none of this would have happened if she was a hack writer, but but the quality of her work with all those other factors means that she had essentially a network of support that kept that legacy alive. Contrast this with Dorothy Richardson. So single for and working class and not in the literary circles at all for most of her much of her adult life. When she began publishing, she was distinctive, experimental, did not sell well after the first couple of books, particularly, as you can see, by the late 20s and early 30s, the books are barely getting reviewed. Her husband, I mean, she lived about as close to the bare existence as one could be, really. I mean, if you read about their lives, they were living on the pennies she made. Even her hack work was poorly paid hack work. The translations she did were not remunerative activities. They lived in these miserable houses much of the time. She had handouts from Breyer and other good friends for much of the life. So, she essentially what you're doing is hacking off those connections. And then on top of everything, you end up, when she's died, her books have been out of print for almost 20 years. The wonder is that she was remembered at all.
It's very true.
Well, I want to open it up for discussions. I'm sure, as always, we've got some great questions out there, and I see Phyllis has a hand raised. So Phyllis, if you want to jump in.
Oh, hi, Brad. Hi, Laura. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to reading your novels. And your mention
thank you.
Oh, yes, you're welcome.
And we met on Twitter, I think. Didn't we say hi on Twitter?
Yes, several times, I think.
Nice to see a face.
I know, it's so funny. It's like I finally met somebody here in Berkeley where I live, which is a tiny town, and I finally met them face to face. And he went, "Oh," I said, "Yes, I'm Oracle." And I said, "Oh, okay." But you're starting the lovely story about the note in the book that literally fell into your hands, and her handwriting, the titles of the novels that had. So I have access to the University of California, Berkeley. I'm a retiree from there. So I go to the library and they have all the first editions, or at least so far.
Amazing.
In general circulation, by the way.
Oh, next time I'm in California, I'd love to make a trip there.
Oh, please do. And I could set you up with a Bancroft for the rare manuscripts too. So definitely let me know.
That would be amazing.
So each of those so far, including the Interim copy, has printed the forthcoming title of the next one.
Okay.
So it's always made me wonder. So here, I'll take a picture and send it to you later. It has Deadlock in preparation. So how far ahead was she working? And what kind of publisher trusts a writer to produce? That just seemed to me so unusual. So I wondered if you could talk to some of that.
Well, I think part of the answer is that her writing went through phases when, it was very wanted at first. And she had a good relationship with Duckworth, her first publisher. And that was probably true of the early volumes. Although, Brad, if you can add to this, because I said my scholarship was rusty, I'd be grateful. But then there were other factors like she actually had a kind of breakdown which happened through overwork, and I suspect frustration, you know, not being able to write as she wanted to, not being able to get the recognition she wanted. And so there was a forced break in her writing. And when she came back to it, she said in her letters, you know, my writing's really changed and I feel like it's thinner. So there were all sorts of interruptions to her career that interrupted the flows of the novels coming out. Yeah, but I know that, you know, for the first volume, she was very much in demand. Publisher wanted her.
I see. So
And
it was
also I
all,
think gave her advances because, you know, to help her because she was so impoverished.
right, right. And it sounds as if, speaking as a former journalist, it sounds as if she, you know, learned to make a living from writing, that she could say she would write this. I mean, deadlines were not a scary thing. In fact,
No.
they may have been good for her. From my experience, it helps to get things moving.
They
But
focus the mind.
yeah. But thank you. That's I can't wait to read your books. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I think we also need to keep in mind that, I mean, she had a very supportive editor in Edward Garnett at Duckworth, but that support essentially stopped in the mid to late 20s. And so she didn't actually maintain, I mean, the output of the books slowed down somewhat. And also the publisher support started to dwindle. So she had some significant challenges, and I think partly because readers, I mean, there's no way I think that she knew where she was going when she started.
No, I agree with that.
And that the great thing from a spiritual, I guess, standpoint is, you know, to have the courage to go forth, not knowing where you're going to end up. But I would say in the publishing business, my impression is that that's not an attractive pitch to many.
No, I completely agree.
So we have a Jim.
They like certainty and predictability.
Yeah. Jim, you've got your hand raised if you'd like to chime in.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, Louisa, I haven't read your novel, but I will do now. And thank you for a lovely introduction. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more. Yeah, I was wondering about if you could say a bit more about the process of how you came to sort of find a voice for what you were saying in the novel, and you know how you sort of disentangled yourself from Dorothy's unique style and wrote your own very different one.
Yes. Well, as I said, the 4 years of my PhD, you do become very close to your subject. And so I felt I knew her quite well. I felt like she lived inside me and I got to know her very well. And I wanted a style that was, it was quite a tricky balance. I wanted to keep some of her preoccupations. And I mean, things like, you know, she was really preoccupied with light. There are the most beautiful descriptions of light, the way the light falls, the quality of it in her writing. So I, you know, was very alive to light in her books and to, you know, wanting to catch that moment, almost like Virginia Woolf's the moment of being, wanting to really live in that moment. So things like that I tried to stay quite close to. And but you know, I'm not naturally an experimental writer, so the traditional mode of storytelling came quite easily. So, you know, on the one hand, I was doing my thing, but on the other, I was trying to capture and reflect some of Dorothy's spirit. You can judge how successful I was or not.
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah, that's really interesting because it's not very often I have a chance to speak to a fictional author on these threads, so to speak.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Well, it's
Just
like a sort of,
apropos- Sorry, go
it's a
on.
process of osmosis, and it's not really a
Mhm.
conscious thing. You know, I just slowly absorb her by reading about her and thinking about her, reading what she wrote, etc.
Mm.
Did you want to ask something else?
Well, I was just going to ask if you went through many rewrites, or did it sort of flow, or how does it work for you?
Well, I
If
don't.
other people are interested in this, yeah.
I'll tell you briefly that the first draft was a completely different shape,
Mhm.
and it went right up to her marriage to Alan Odell, and it was combined with a contemporary narrative. So it was somewhat like A.S. Byatt's Possession, I guess, in which a PhD student kind of finds Dorothy Richardson and it changes her life, which Brad and I were talking about. Pilgrimage is a sort of book that changes your life. But my literary agent actually said to me, you know what, I've been thinking about this, and the years of her affair with H.G. Wells are really the most dramatic and interesting part of the novel, and make them your focus. So that's how it happened. And I did millions of rewrites. I always do.
All right. Okay. Well done. I look forward to reading it. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much.
Let me just also mention, if anybody's interested, there is an audiobook version of The Lodger, which is wonderful. That's actually the first time I read it, so to speak. It was as an audiobook, and then got it to keep around as a basic Richardson's text, because it's, again, it's a wonderful resource, particularly because it does sort of give you a clue. I mean, that's, I think, a lot of us, and what I try to do with the website is to help in moments of disorientation, because there are points throughout Pilgrimage where, as a reader, you're kind of wondering, where am I, what's going on? And Richardson is so deliberate in not having those kind of structural elements that we rely on as readers. In fact, I was just typing up stuff about the plot of Deadlock, sorry, and it struck me for the first time that there were two things going on at the time of Interim and Deadlock that would have been fairly major things in the lives of English people. Number one, the Boer War was going on. And number two, in fact, during the period of Deadlock, is Queen Victoria died. And as a reader, you will have no idea of that kind of.
I guess the point is that the total focus was Dorothy Richardson's Miriam's consciousness, and anything that fell outside that or was on the periphery got very scant attention. And
Yeah.
I got a question once at an event. A South African asked me, why isn't there more about the Boer War? And the answer is because Miriam wasn't very preoccupied with it. And Brad, I found that image of the manuscript on my computer.
Wonderful. Absolutely.
Let me try quickly, but if it takes too long, we won't spend time on it. Can you see that?
Yes, there we go.
So there we go, and it's almost indecipherable.
Wow.
But it was, it was just the most wonderful moment.
Although I do have to say, looking at this one, I mean, if anybody has looked at some of the images of Richardson's writing that's available online, like from the Beinecke Library, this is surprisingly legible by Richardsonian standards. She had quite a colorful way of writing, which was very loopy.
Yes. Maybe she knew someone would find that one day.
Amazing. So yeah, thank you for that. Are any other questions that folks want to ask of Louisa? We've got access here, and I'm sure as we look through what's been happening in the course of Pilgrimage up to now, we have opportunities to pick her brain. Anyone else have something? If not, I will certainly jump in. I see Phyllis with her hand again.
Well, this is Miss Dear. Somehow, when she reappeared, I went, "Oh goodness, Dorothy, you're starting to have a plot. You know, what's going on here?" And then I thought, so pre-tubercular, penurious, needy, manipulative, slick, but ultimately a failure. Is this some kind of alter ego that she's glad she's not, afraid she might be, or I hate to project onto an author what they're thinking.
So first of all, to go back to your first point about just as you think there's a plot, you know, Dorothy just kicks the ball from out under your feet. And I think she did that quite deliberately always. You know, she resisted anything that looked like a shape or a plot or narrative progression. I mean,
she also loves to put in little jokes. I mean, almost every couple of pages, there's a little joke. Anyway, yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, I always read Eleanor Dear as a sort of bad, you know, role model of femininity. Or she was like all the bad parts of femininity, you know, being so manipulative, so artificial, so underhand in the way she went about getting what she wanted. And at the same time, there were things Dorothy liked and admired about her, but then, you know, she had these moments of revulsion, you know, especially when she was being manipulated, and she just kind of recoiled. So I mean, we could, I suppose, say that Eleanor was, you know, everything Dorothy didn't want to be. And everything about femininity that she despised. You know, she had this very dual, on the one hand, a woman's mind is deeper and richer than that of a man, but she couldn't bear the sort of artificial, what she called them, household women, whose only preoccupations were the home.
Right, and which she also was humane enough to say, probably that's because that's the only way they could survive in the way men ran the world.
Yes, absolutely. And she knew all about the difficulty of surviving. She just decided to, you know, go about surviving in a different way.
And the different sisters are showing different ways of surviving in this kind of world too.
Exactly. And that's really interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in, and it's slight defense of Eleanor Dear is that, and I think you suggested at the beginning, which is, you know, put yourself in Eleanor Dear's shoes. Her manipulativeness is essentially a survival skill for her.
No, it's true. It's true.
And
it's true. And also, she's a very compelling character, didn't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, and I do think that it probably got Richardson, or Miriam, if you will, at a sore point, which is, you know, how far am I from being in that same situation? So it probably was painful. I see Jim has got his hand raised again, so please, Jim, jump in.
Is that okay? I mean,
yes, absolutely.
Questions. I'd like to ask Louisa again about how she came to reach a higher esteem for H.G. Wells, because I do find Wells difficult to like, from what I know of him. And of course, we've got our own 21st century glasses on, but he's not very nice with women, and you're a woman writer. So how did you?
I did say to you that, you know, he treated women appallingly. So I'm aware of his bad side. But I think one of the things he did, which was very unusual for men of the day, was he made, and, you know, he went for women who were bright as well as beautiful. I mean, as well as Dorothy, he had an affair with Rebecca West and Amber Reeves, who like got a starred first at Cambridge. And he made women feel that he was interested in their minds, in their thoughts, as well as in their bodies. And that's quite compelling even now. But I think for a woman, you know, at that time, it must have been extraordinary and quite intoxicating.
Yeah, thanks.
You know, I don't like him as a man, but there are things I find compelling about him.
Yeah, it's a bit like Eric Gill, isn't it? Who was repulsive in lots of ways, and yet there are also some compelling things.
Exactly. And you don't have to like all your characters as a writer as well.
Yeah, true. Thanks.
And I think it's also good to bear in mind, in the context of that time, how exceptional openness and supportive attitudes towards women, expressing their intellectual side, that probably
And
was highly attractive because it was so rare.
he kept saying to Dorothy, to Miriam in Pilgrimage, you should write a novel. Your talents are wasted. Write a novel, just write. And admittedly, they weren't the kind of novels she wanted to write. He said to her, you should write the first dental novel. And then because she worked as a dentist secretary, and then he said something awful like, women are only good at writing their own experiences, affairs of the heart. So that definitely wasn't the kind of novel Dorothy wanted to write. But he was encouraging, and he recognized her gifts. He said, you describe things so well in conversation, better than anyone I know, and you write it down.
Are there other, let's see, anyone else want to ask a question while we've got Louisa with us here today? I just want to go back to a comment that you made that I think is so striking, particularly when I look at Pilgrimage. One of the things that interests me is to kind of contrast it with what else was being written and its time. And so you use the example, I mean, there are a number of scenes in the books where Miriam is walking alone through London and she thinks about, am I safe? And how rare that is dealt with. I mean, just today, essentially the lack of common knowledge of a woman's sense of vulnerability on the street is still essentially woefully misunderstood or little known. My daughter often tells about a college lecture she was in, one of these 500 great American 500, 700 person lecture halls for a 100 level class. And the professor asked in the course of this lecture, he said, I want you to imagine that tonight you're walking home, it's 10 p.m. You're walking to the parking lot from the library towards your car or to the bus stop. Please raise your hand if that thought makes you afraid. Every woman in the auditorium raised their hand.
Isn't that shocking?
Not a single man.
It's just shocking. So, as we said, those preoccupations are so relevant. And it's terrible that women feel like that in the 21st century.
Right. Yeah, we haven't made much progress in that way. One question I want to ask in terms of looking at Richardson's material as you were doing your scholarship, and it's interesting, conflict. We haven't really talked about that. Can you give us a couple of examples of the conflicts in Pilgrimage that you focused on for your thesis?
Now, this is when my memory gets really rusty, because I told you it was like more than 20 years ago. But one of the things was Miriam's own anger, which is never really focused on, but there's a lot of it.
Right.
And I'm sure that it stemmed from what happened with her family, her sort of feckless father who lost all their money, and then having to care for her mother when she was suicidal. And Miriam no adolescent should be put in that position, and then so Miriam was quite easily angered, quite irascible, and then there are lots of moments of conflict in Pilgrimage, but I think maybe, Brad, your memory is probably fresher than mine.
Oh, well, you're flattering.
The argument was that we think of Pilgrimage as being very kind of open-ended, very fluid, but actually there are these real moments of conflict and aggression that are much harder that go throughout the book.
Right. Well, there is the example where I think it's in Interim, where she has gone to the lecture and she's thinking to herself, either as she's sitting there, or as she's coming back, she's thinking, well, my father went to these things all the time, and he never once thought of taking me. And it seems, I mean, I could see this to be a challenging topic, because very often you can see Miriam in her thoughts is having, is angry at someone or angry at something. But she rarely acts upon that. She really suppresses a lot of that, doesn't she?
Absolutely. I mean, she does snap occasionally. She snaps at people, but yes, she represses a lot of it.
Right. I mean, I suppose that comes from a variety of sources. I guess Englishness to start with,
Being a
but
woman.
also her being a woman, her social situation, her economic situation.
Yeah.
She didn't want to burn a bridge.
Absolutely.
She couldn't afford to burn too
No,
many
she
bridges.
couldn't afford to.
To contrast with H.G. Wells, for example.
Yeah, but he came from that kind of poverty, which I think is why they understood each other.
That's interesting. Yeah. Does anyone else have a question that they'd like to ask? We've had some great participation here today. Yeah, Carolyn is saying, Karen Harowitz is saying, yeah, stormed out ahead of the girls in Ported Roof when she got angry in the situation in the girls' school.
Yeah, I love that, Karen. You're so right. I love that you picked that.
Mikey had a question about the character of Antoine Baudouin or Baldwin in the Interim. Did you want to? You were asking about what did you miss in the interaction with Baldwin? Could you speak to that a little more?
There. I'm not sure I can speak to it. It seems that there was this interaction, the piano playing, and then the next time he comes up, then he disappears, but the next time he comes up, there's some comment that she's musing about him saying that she wants attention. And as I read it, I thought I need to go back and reread and try to understand what the first interaction was, but I didn't do that. And I thought maybe there's someone here who was a more subtle reader than I.
Should I answer?
Yeah, please, if you.
Well, and then maybe you can carry it forward. But first of all, her interaction with foreign men is quite a theme. There's Michael or Benjamin Grad, and then Mr. Baldwin. I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
In the US, we call the college Bowdoin, so I don't know what you would do.
Okay.
Well, my guess is because Baudouin is a very common. It's a Belgian name. Of course, they had King Baudouin in the 60s. So I'm guessing it's Richardson's transposition of Baudouin, which is because he is Belgian.
So I feel like she liked them because they were outsiders, and of course she was an outsider. She was displaced from her class. She wasn't sure about her sexuality. She felt more like a man than a woman. So I think she felt a link with these people because they were outsiders. And my memory of those conversations is poor, but perhaps she talked to him in her normal forthright way, and he found it too much, and he interpreted it as a call for attention. But maybe you can add to that.
I'm afraid I can't. I mean, that's why I was asking if anyone had a response to it.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else.
Quite a bit later that she was thinking about it, and then she veered off to something else. But I just didn't remember if there had been something that I had misread that constituted a conflict. I wasn't clear.
Well, just to pitch in 2 cents here. One thing that Baudouin might have been, or Baldwin, or whatever, might have been responding to, and it's sort of a Gallic, the Wallonian, the French, Belgians are also kind of have this, which is a real kind of constitutional dislike of directness. So,
yes,
so,
yes, and
you know,
especially coming from a woman.
yeah, exactly. So, for example, one of the things when I worked in NATO for years, and it took me quite a long time to recognize that when a French person says it would be interesting to do such and such, they're not just thinking, it's because what they want to say is do this. This is a must, but it's considered rude to say, we really need to do this. So they simply say things like, it would be interesting. Or a friend of mine who lives in Paris says, you know, if a French neighbor was unhappy with the amount of noise you were making, they might come to your door and say something like, have you moved your stereo? It seems like it's closer to the wall now.
And what they mean is too bloody loud.
Yes, exactly. So if this is Richardson offering us a realistic view of a Gallic or Wallonian character, I suspect that's probably what she was reflecting, is that
I totally agree. And I just saw an interesting comment on the chat about Anne Veronica. And that's part of the lodger. So I'd love to, hang on. Did I imagine that? Did one of you write a note?
No, there was Kim actually said.
She said she just read H.G. Wells's Anne Veronica. So I think what I wanted to add is that Anne Veronica, the character, I think she was a composite of women. I think she was based on Jane, his wife, and probably on Amber Reeves. But I think there was a bit of Dorothy there too, in her determination to work, to find meaningful work and to have a career and to break away from home. And there's a bit in the lodger, which is kind of my invention, where Dorothy reads Anne Veronica and feels terribly exposed at recognizing part of herself in the book. Also Anne Veronica takes a married lover. And, that kind of, I guess, it interested me how Dorothy felt recognizing parts of herself in the book and how the others felt.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point.
I have her shrinking, feeling very exposed and feeling like, he'd kind of taken something from her.
I want to actually, one last question I want to ask before we leave, and this is about the lodger. So it is kind of putting yourself into Wells. One of the things I recall that you dealt with very early on in the lodger was the fact that Wells changed his wife's name.
Yes. Well, I mean, I was completely fascinated by that because names are caught up with identity. I mean, it's like he changed her, but he changed it from Amy Catherine, which I find terribly pretty, to Jane, which is much more practical, has all the connotations of plain Jane and is slightly slightly governessy, as Miriam says. And he made her into his housekeeper and manager. And, the change of name seems to reflect that transformation. She was a science teacher, but, when she married him, everything revolved around him and nurturing his talent. And I think she lost herself. She became subsumed by Jane.
Well, I mean, it's amazing because you could not pick, at least in the English language, you could not pick a more generic woman's name than Jane. even Mary has
Mm.
too many religious connotations,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So, does anyone else want to take chip in before we sign off for the month? It's been wonderful, Louisa. I can't thank you enough for your joining us and offering your perspectives. It's
I've enjoyed it.
Please go
I've
ahead.
enjoyed it so much, and thank you so much for having me. And if any of you are interested in a discounted copy of any of my books, just please reach out.
Yes, please do. It's a great opportunity. As again, if you're enjoying pilgrimage, I guarantee you will be fascinated by The Lodger. It's such a great, separate perspective on the book, and illuminates it. And particularly, if you haven't read essentially this summer's books, you might actually want to read The Lodger now, because it will probably answer many practical questions about what's going on and who's being referred to, and some of these other things that we struggle with in the course of reading pilgrimage. Let me just think. Mikey has ordered a copy, so good.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you.
Thank
But
you.
I can get it for you cheaper. I'm just saying that because you're such a lovely group. But thank you, Mikey.
Well, Louisa, thank you so much for joining us, and thank everybody for coming. We don't have a specific date for June session, but we will have Dr. Adam Guy, who is another active Richardson scholar. He's one of those working on the Oxford edition right now. We will probably have it on the Wednesday or Thursday, the last week of June. And so we're still lining up folks to join us for discussions later on the year. And I thank everybody for hanging in. This is I think we've reached the point where those who are going to drop off have dropped off. So if you're here with us and you're part of the larger reading pilgrimage group, I think we can count on seeing you again all the way through to December. So I have to thank you for that. So Louisa, thank you.
Someone's just asking for my address. Hang on, my email address. Hang on, let me. Brad, my problem, I'll tell you the easiest way. Just go onto my website, louisatrager.com, and just go to the contact page. But also, I'm sure Brad will kindly forward it if you don't mind, Brad.
Absolutely.
If you didn't get it.
Be happy to provide that. Although I have to say, I think I contacted you through your website the first time, Louisa. So
It works.
It actually works. There's a human being behind that. So, and that's rare these days, it seems. Louisa, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us. I'll let everybody know when this gets posted up to YouTube, and I look forward to next month's discussion. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.